This is lesson 2 for our Java class. And before we get started on lesson 2, I want to talk about smart way to use the computer while you're learning how to code. If you notice here, I have two separate windows set up. In the right side window, I have my um, Google document that has the directions for today's lesson. On the left side, I have my Eclipse workspace where I'm going to actually do my programming. So that way I can read the directions on the right, I can follow them on the left, and I'm not switching back and forth between windows that I can't see and covering up things and being unable to read the directions. So for the rest of the class, I'd like you to make sure you set up your window that way so that you can read the directions and follow them easier. Lesson 2 is on variable types and type. The word type is a computer science term that refers to the kind of variable or the kind of thing that you're looking at, the type of thing. So that's why it's listed here with a capital T. When you see type, sometimes you'll see it with a capital T because it's a specific term. The three types we're going to look at today are the string type, the int type, and the double type. And as it says here, a good way to learn the following things is to create a new class or a new program and modify it according to the directions shown. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here to Eclipse. I'm going to click on New, Class, and then I'm going to call this Lesson 02. And because I want to be able to run my program, I'm going to turn on the main, have it create a main, and click Finish. Now, if you forgot that, you could always just copy this whole part of the text and copy it over there. But if you just create it, if you have the computer create it, you're all set. So the first string we're going to look at is the first type is the string type. It's used to store things in quotes. So for example, if I say string s, which means that my type of variable is a string and my variable's name is s, and it equals hello cruel world, and put a semicolon at the end, I have stored these letters in the variable s, which is of type string. Notice there's a caution over here because I'm not really using it for anything. I've just created it. But then on the next line, I'm going to do system.out.println, and then in parentheses, instead of quotes, I'm just going to put in s, close the parentheses, and a semicolon. And I spelled that wrong, so println. And now if I run it, you can see down at the bottom, it didn't print an S, it printed what was stored in S. It printed the string S, which has stored hello cruel world. Now one thing that you'll notice is that usually we like to indent different words, different lines in Java so it's easier to see what's grouped together. If you want to do that, you can select everything. If you're using a Mac, it's Command A. Um, on a PC, it's Control A, but on a Mac, it's Command A selects everything. Command I fixes all the indenting to be the way that it is normally done to make it so you can see what's inside the main, which goes from here to here. So, and if you run it, it doesn't make a difference, the indenting, but it makes it easier to read your code. The second thing we're going to do is look at the int type. The int type is used to store integers. They can be positive or negative. So I'm going to next make a new variable. It's of type int. Its name is age. It equals 59. Notice that there are no quotes around that because numbers don't have quotes around them, only strings do. A string is a series of characters. And so if I print that out, and I run that, it'll of course still print hello cruel world, but then it'll print whatever the age is equal to. Now, large numbers are sometimes really hard to read if it's all strung together. So Java has an interesting new way of writing numbers. We can't separate things with commas like we do when we normally write words. If you try doing something like saying int large number equals something like that, it's difficult to read. Don't forget to put a semicolon at the end. It's difficult to read and figure out exactly how big that number is, especially if there were a whole bunch of zeros in the middle of it. And we might try putting commas in. Java doesn't like that because commas have a specific meaning in Java. And so it'll give an error message saying that there are multiple markers, there's a syntax error, that this doesn't work. So what Java will let you do is put an underscore, and it'll ignore the underscore. And it's easier to read that number if we put them every three. So I can see this is 12,300,000. And then if I tried to print that out, and I print large number and run this, you can see that it prints out the number. It doesn't put in the separators, it just prints out the number in the harder to read version, but at least we were able to enter it in the easier to use version. The third type that we're going to talk about today is the double. And a double is used to store floating point numbers. Floating point numbers is another word for numbers that have decimals in them. Double means double precision, which means it's going to use a larger block of memory to store the number. So if I say double, and I can call it D equals -137.8036, and put a semicolon, I can then print out my number. And that prints it out just fine. One of the things that comes up sometimes is how do I use scientific notation? Because in Java we can't use the caret like we do sometimes when we're typing, or if you use spreadsheets, you use the caret to signify that you want powers. In Java, the way that we do scientific notation is kind of how we do it on a graphing calculator, where it uses the capital letter E. So I could change D to equal a number in scientific notation by saying what the number is, E, and then whatever the times 10 to the number is. And so this means that it's in scientific notation 1.45667 times 10 to the 23rd. And sometimes when we're learning to do this kind of thing, we put in a remark after something to say E signifies scientific notation. And that's optional. It's just to tell people what's going on and why we use that. So you'll notice a couple things that I did here. I declared when I said int age, I said that age is a variable and it's of type int. Or when I did string s, I declared that string, the s is a string. And so that's a computer science term, declaring, that says that we're telling the computer what type of thing something is. And then we're also initializing it. And so when you say that it equals something, the first time you do that, you're initializing a variable, or you're giving it its initial or its first value. We could also do that on two separate lines if we wanted to. So I could have said string s, or I could have a new one, string s2 and a semicolon, and now it knows that there is a string and its name is s2. And then on a separate line, I could say s2 equals, and give it whatever I want it to equal, my second string, and with the semicolon. And I would also be able to use that for whatever I wanted to use it for. Similarly, we could declare integers or doubles. I could say int integer 2, and it knows it exists, and then later I could initialize it by giving it a value. If I try to, let's try to spell that correctly. There integer 2. If I tried to just give something new, if I said something like integer 3 and gave it a value, Java would have a problem with that because it says integer 3 cannot be resolved to a variable. You have to first declare it either on this line or before this line before you can use it. Also, if I try to redeclare something, it'll have trouble with that as well. So if I tried saying integer 2 equals some new value, I'm not able to do that because it says that there's a duplicate local variable. You can only declare it one time. You can use it multiple times. You can only declare it one time. So there's some practice in the lesson for you to try those kinds of things and see what works and what doesn't work. Let's get rid of these last couple things here. So there are some rules about variable names. Variables have to start with a letter or an underscore character, but that is, underscores are not normally done most of the time. And the only punctuation you can use is an underscore. So there's a list of legal names here. These are all allowed. There's underscore here. There's no spaces between these words. Illegal names are names that start with numbers or that have spaces in them, or a dot or a semicolon or a dash. Those are not allowed in Java. By convention, in Java, we use, there's a couple different ways that we normally name things. So one of the most common way to name things is like this one, a large area, gold nugget. It's easy to read those two words because each successive word after the first is capitalized. We normally start with the lowercase for the first and then capital for the rest of the words. And that's called camel case because camels have a hump in the middle of them. Another common way of doing things is this way, which some people call snake case because it kind of snakes everything out by putting an underscore between words. That's very common in some languages, but most people in Java use camel case. And then the other thing is if you have something that's never going to change, use all caps. So capital D, we would expect that to be something that would not change because it's a capital letter.